The boy couldn't resist the temptation to play with his toy plane, which terrified his father. He quickly put down his older son and rushed towards his younger son with all his might. Seeing this, the mother and daughter were also filled with horror, but they covered their mouths and noses, not daring to make a sound. At this moment, the father suddenly noticed a dark shadow in the forest swiftly approaching the younger son. Despite his desperate run, it was too late to save him. It turned out that 2.5 months ago, a terrifying alien creature invaded Earth. These creatures, though eyeless, had exceptionally acute hearing and sense of smell. Their strong limbs allowed them to approach prey quickly, and their hard shells were even bulletproof. The entire world had become their hunting ground. In the face of such a monster's attack, human society collapsed in an instant. Maintaining absolute silence was the only rule for survival in this post-apocalyptic world. The Lee family relied on this rule to barely survive in a world overrun by monsters. A farmhouse on the outskirts was their refuge. Each time they went out to search for supplies, the family would spread sand on the road in advance to minimize the sound of their footsteps. Communication between them was conducted solely through sign language, for fear of making the slightest noise that might alert the nearby monsters. However, during one of these outings, an accident occurred. The family was preparing to return home laden with supplies, but they were unaware that the younger son had secretly taken a toy plane. The scene at the beginning happened on their way back home. The death of the younger son plunged everyone into grief, and the father was filled with guilt and remorse, believing he had failed to take good care of him. To prevent similar tragedies from happening again, they became even more cautious than before. They installed cameras around the farm to keep an eye on the monster's movements at all times. Since they couldn't make any noise, they also set up neon lights around the house as warning signals. A red light meant that monsters were nearby. The father sent out distress signals every day, hoping to find other survivors, but each time he received no response. Time passed and a year went by. The family was about to welcome a new member. To prepare for the fourth child, they transformed the basement into a soundproof room, covering the walls with thick layers of newspaper for insulation. The crib was enclosed in a completely sealed wooden box, leaving only an oxygen tube for breathing. After all the preparations were complete, the family sat down to have a meal together, maintaining the sense of ritual that was important to them, while also praying for the disaster to pass soon. However, after dinner, when the two siblings were playing, they accidentally knocked over a lamp. Such a noise was enough to attract monsters. Although Lee quickly extinguished the fire with a blanket, an unusual noise came from outside. They all immediately held their breath, not daring to make a sound. Lee cautiously approached the window to check, relieved to see that it was only 2 groundhogs. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, unaware that a monster had already come close. The groundhogs had taken the brunt of the danger for them. The next morning, Lee began to spread sand on the road, preparing to take his older son fishing. However, Marcus did not want to go, fearing that he would be caught by the monsters like his younger brother. His mother told him he must go because, in the post-apocalyptic world, one must learn basic survival skills to take care of oneself and others. With Evelyn's encouragement, Marcus finally mustered the courage to go out. But before they left, Reagan insisted on going with them. However, her father rejected her again, telling her to stay home and take care of her mother. Reagan had a congenital hearing impairment, and her lack of sensitivity to sound made her more vulnerable. To help her, Lee had specially made a hearing aid for her. But Reagan did not understand her father's good intentions and left angrily. After her father and brother left, Reagan quietly went to the basement to pack her things. She put on the hearing aid her father had made and left home alone, against her father's wishes. Soon after, Lee and his son arrived at the river. From a fishing trap they had set up earlier, they caught a 2.5-pound perch. Lee intended to hand the fish to his son but accidentally slipped, almost letting it escape, which startled Marcus. He worried that the noise would attract monsters, but his father quickly reassured him that the sound of the river drowned out their voices, and the monsters wouldn't hear them. After that, Lee took Marcus to a noisy waterfall and let out a loud roar to release some of the pent-up emotions. Afterward, the two prepared to return home but encountered an old man along the way. To their horror, his wife lay dead on the ground, apparently attacked by the monsters just moments before. The old man stood there in despair, having lost all hope of survival. Despite Lee's attempts to stop him, he let out a loud roar. Lee quickly hid with Marcus behind a large tree, watching helplessly as the old man was killed by the monster that had been attracted by the noise. Meanwhile, Evelyn, who was alone at home and discovered her daughter was missing, had to go out to hang the freshly washed clothes herself. As she climbed the stairs, a sack accidentally caught on a nail, which she unknowingly pulled straight, inadvertently creating a hazard for later. After hanging the clothes, Evelyn sat in her younger son's room, overwhelmed by grief and tears. Perhaps it was her intense longing for her lost son that made her realize her due date had come earlier than expected. Evelyn felt a sense of urgency. Giving birth alone under such circumstances was tantamount to suicide. She wanted to go to the basement and turn on the warning light to alert Lee of her predicament, but accidentally stepped on the very nail she had straightened earlier. The sharp pain hit her instantly, but Evelyn dared not make a sound. She gritted her teeth and pulled her foot free, then hurried to turn on the warning light, knowing that the noise could have attracted the monsters. Sure enough, as she was about to enter the soundproof room, a monster had already arrived in the house. She quickly hid and found an alarm clock, planning to use it to create a loud noise and escape. The pain in her foot and the impending labor made her sweat profusely, each moment a torment. She struggled to control her breathing and finally set the alarm clock, hiding in a corner and waiting quietly. The monster, drawn by the sound, began to search the basement. Evelyn's heart raced as she watched it, praying silently. She could only cover her mouth with her hand, resigned to her fate, as the monster revealed its sharp ears and began to intently listen for the faintest sounds. At the critical moment, the alarm finally rang, distracting the monster, and Evelyn seized the opportunity to leave the basement. However, as she was about to enter the soundproof room, another monster arrived. She had no choice but to hide in the bathtub on the second floor. At the same time, Lee, realizing something was wrong, rushed back home. Seeing the warning light on, he knew danger was imminent and sent his son to light fireworks in the distance to lure the monsters away. For his mother's safety, Marcus became brave and acted immediately. Lee then picked up a gun and prepared to infiltrate the house to rescue his wife. But the situation was already critical. As blood continued to flow, Evelyn, lying in the bathtub, could no longer hold back her labor pains. She knew that making a sound would mean certain death for both her and her unborn child. Fortunately, at the crucial moment, Marcus set off the fireworks, and as the monster was distracted, Evelyn finally let out a scream. Hearing the noise, Lee rushed into the house with his gun. Reagan, hearing the commotion, also hurried back home. But when Lee cautiously reached the second floor, all he saw was a pool of blood in the bathtub. He thought his wife had been killed by the monster, but then a bloody handprint appeared on the glass door. To his surprise, Evelyn had given birth alone and managed to survive the ordeal. It was hard to imagine the pain she had endured. Lee could only hold her and offer comfort. As the baby began to cry, he quickly took the mother and child to the soundproof room, placing the newborn in the soundproof box with an oxygen mask. The thought of the other two children possibly being in danger prompted Lee to go out and search for them. Unbeknownst to him, the monster had damaged the water pipe, and water was slowly seeping into the soundproof room. On the other side, Marcus was about to return when he heard an unusual noise and realized the monster was nearby. In a panic, he ran without considering the risk of exposing his location. He tripped over a tire and passed out. At that moment, Reagan, who had returned, saw a light in the cornfield and curiously bent down to investigate, unaware that a monster was right behind her. Reagan was oblivious to the danger, but the next second, something strange happened. The amplified sound from her hearing aid somehow caused the monster discomfort. Reagan narrowly escaped death and, following the light, found her awakened brother. They then climbed to the top of the corn silo and lit a bonfire, waiting for their father's rescue. Meanwhile, Lee, monitoring the security cameras, did not see his children's whereabouts. In the soundproof room, Evelyn was shocked to find the soundproof room flooded. The newborn in the soundproof box had been swept away nearby. Worse still, a monster had somehow entered the room. As Evelyn got up to retrieve her baby, she saw the monster emerging from the water. She mustered her courage and slowly approached, finally picking up her child. But at the same time, the monster also surfaced, and Evelyn quickly held her breath, carefully retreating behind the water curtain to hide her presence. The monster seemed to sense something and began to approach slowly. At that moment, Reagan on the silo, not wanting to wait for their doom, decided to lead Marcus back home. However, Marcus wanted to continue waiting for their father's rescue. As they argued, Marcus accidentally fell into the silo, and the noise attracted the monster. This inadvertently saved their mother's life. Meanwhile, Lee in the cornfield discovered their location. Fortunately, the silo was filled with corn, and Marcus was unharmed. But he faced a new crisis. The piled corn was like a swamp, ready to swallow him at any moment. Reagan signaled Marcus not to move, but he couldn't see her. He struggled to reach a nearby flashlight. Then, a swaying iron door fell into the silo, nearly crushing Marcus. Frightened, he twisted his body frantically, only to sink deeper. Worse still, the monster outside was attracted by the noise and rushed towards Reagan and Marcus. To save her brother, Reagan jumped into the silo as well. She pushed the door panel over, successfully rescuing Marcus, but putting herself in danger. As Reagan was gradually being engulfed by the corn, Marcus urgently crawled towards her, stretching out his hand to grasp hers. After some fumbling around, he finally found her hand and, with all his might, heaved her up from the depths of the corn. As the two caught their breath, the monster leaped into the silo. In a panic, they used the door panel to block it, but the monster easily slashed through it. At this critical moment, the hearing aid came into play again. The disoriented monster became extremely uncomfortable and turned to flee, leaving the siblings to escape through the large hole the monster had crashed through. Finally reunited with their father, they realized the monster had not left. Lee instructed his children to hide in a nearby car while he armed himself with an axe. However, the monster was on the roof. Lee was punched off and sent flying. In desperation, Marcus shouted for his father, inadvertently putting himself and his sister in danger. As the monster lunged towards them, Reagan's hearing aid emitted a piercing sound once more. But this time, she didn't know it could save their lives and quickly turned it off. The monster, no longer distracted, pounced on the siblings in the car. Badly injured, Lee slowly got up, seeing his children in danger. He knew what he had to do as a father. After expressing his love to his children with sign language, Lee made a decisive roar. The monster instantly killed Lee. Without time to grieve, Marcus released the handbrake of the truck, and it slid all the way to the front of their home. Evelyn, watching from the monitor, saw everything clearly. The three of them embraced and wept, but the crisis was far from over. The monster's roar sounded again, and Evelyn quickly led the siblings to the basement. As the lights flickered, a monster with heavy steps followed closely behind. The three of them were on edge. Evelyn held a gun but hesitated to fire, unsure if she could kill the monster with one shot. Just then, the monster began to search for its prey, emitting a hissing sound that interfered with the monitor. The noise from the monitor seemed to bother the monster greatly. Seeing this, Reagan realized that the monster's acute hearing was both its strength and weakness. Loud noises made the creature uneasy, and her hearing aid could amplify sounds. With this realization, Reagan turned on the hearing aid, and as expected, the monster became restless and uncomfortable at the noise. But this was not enough to kill the monster. Hearing the baby's cry, the monster still tried to lunge forward. Reagan then removed her hearing aid and placed it directly onto a microphone, amplifying the sound even more. This time, the monster could not withstand the noise and collapsed. Evelyn looked at her daughter in disbelief, as if to praise her for her quick thinking. However, the not-quite-dead monster slowly got back up and lunged again. But its protective shell was now completely open, leaving it vulnerable. Evelyn raised her gun and fired, killing the monster once and for all. The gunshot, however, attracted more monsters. Through the monitor, they saw several monsters rapidly approaching. But now that they knew the monster's weakness, they were no longer afraid. They turned the power to its maximum, and dealing with these monsters was no longer a challenge.